Welcome to Bossed Too Hard. I'm your host, Laurel Ordonez, and this is a space where we dive into all things entrepreneurship, the good, the ugly, the I'm winning, I want to quit, and I'm just absolutely done. So thank you for being here today. We are with our guest, Stefan Gilliam, who is one of my best friends.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
I love it.
We do a lot of life together.
Yeah, we do.
So our new audience here at Boss Too Hard.
Yes.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Stefan Gilliam. I do a lot of stuff. It's about like
You do
a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And so it's been interesting to navigate my entrepreneurial journey with you because the lines are kind of blurred.
Oh, I blur lines all the time. I am anybody gets to know me, like there's no boundaries. There are no boundaries.
Yeah.
Like we work in business and there are no boundaries.
Yeah.
So we'll just start from there. There are no boundaries.
Yeah.
So we work in business. I get into your personal life. We hang out. We drink together. You get into my personal life.
Yeah.
There's
and I
no
even
reason.
get to be your coach sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
What's it like being coached by Laurel?
It gets interesting because Laurel is very like pinpoint and matter of fact. And I like to be broad. And she doesn't always like me be as abrasive as I want to.
You are extremely abrasive.
I know.
So
That's how you smooth things out. You know that, right?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Okay, sandpaper. So I want to get into kind of an abrasive topic today.
All right.
And it's something that I have experienced on my journey. And so we talk a lot about fear of failure, right? I'm afraid to fail. And one of the things that you've told me is, well, what happens if you fail?
Yeah.
Like, what happens?
The biggest problem that I've recognized with fear is that people never finish the sentence. So you'd be like, what are you worried about? And they're like, I'm just concerned that, and then they never finish the sentence. Like, they never really articulate what's going to happen if this bad thing happens, right? So like, I'm afraid that it won't work. So what happens if it doesn't work? You're not actually afraid that it won't work.
Yeah.
You're afraid of the result of it not working. So what's the thing that happens if it doesn't work? And people never take the time to really look at that and to walk through it and to identify it and to determine if they're really afraid of that or not.
Yeah. I've come to you a couple times and said, I'm afraid, what if I fail? What if this doesn't work? And when you finish that sentence, I think the last time we had the conversation, it's like, well, I'll get a job. Okay, so what's so scary about not getting a job?
Yeah.
We've had a few conversations where I've come to you in this journey and told you that I was afraid of failing. And when we have that conversation and it's okay, finish the sentence. What if you fail? What if it doesn't work out? When I really think about it, I'll just get a job.
Yeah.
I've had a job before. I've worked for someone else before.
And so then it's like, so what is it that you're afraid of applying for work now? Like, what's the thing that you're so worried about?
Yeah, it's
And that's where the fears kind of sits and resonates, because what fear is usually captured in the unknown. And so because we don't finish those sentences, that's where the fear has time to ruminate and to grow and to develop and to evolve and expand. And that question mark gets bigger and bigger and bigger because we don't finish the sentence. And the longer we don't finish the sentence, the bigger it gets and the bigger the fear gets. Where if we just finish the sentence and we say, okay, so if it fails, then I'll probably have to get another job. And it's like, well, what's so terrible about that?
So when I realized that wasn't that terrible, and I finished that sentence, I kind of had an epiphany.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I wasn't afraid of failure, because we fail all the time.
All the time.
We screw stuff up all the time.
On this episode.
Exactly.
Already. Y'all won't see it, but multiple times.
Yeah. And what I've found is that the success is actually what's scary, because failure is not uncharted territory for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do something new and you exceed at it, and then you have to go to the next level, and there's a new level of responsibility there that you maybe haven't navigated, that is scary as shit.
Well, you know what? I think that's the thing. And so when people, I know when I was starting out, not only just in life, but in business, people would always talk about fear of success. And I could never wrap my head around it. I was like, well, what the hell does that mean? Like, nobody's afraid of $1 million, right? Like, what does fear of success mean? And I think it's important that we start to reframe that phrase and call it what you just said, fear of responsibility. Fear of responsibility, fear of work, fear of accountability. That's what fear of success actually is when you open it up and take a look at it. It's not, I'm afraid I'm going to do well. That doesn't make sense to anyone. And I think that's why people get locked up in the fear of failure space. It's not that I'm afraid I'm going to do well. It's I'm afraid that once I do well, the things that come along with that, I won't be able to maintain. I won't be able to sustain. I won't be able to keep this going. I won't be able to keep up the persona. I won't be able to maintain the energy or the knowledge or the wisdom or the capacity or whatever it is. And I don't want the responsibility that comes along with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the scariest steps I ever took in business was hiring my first employee.
Yes.
That's
always. Because
And
now you got to pay them.
well, yeah. And it takes this concept of, there's this concept we always hear that leaders eat last.
Yes.
And it's
and less.
true.
Last and less.
Yes. Because what I've realized is, so you have a book,
Yes.
the 8 Elite Principles.
Butcher the name of my book.
I'm
Is that
so
what we're
sorry.
going to do?
Stefan,
Okay.
can you please tell us the name of your book?
So it's called the Elite 8.
Yes.
It's the 8 Principles for Elite Entrepreneurship.
That's it.
That's the one.
Yeah. That's a lot of ease.
It
I'm
is.
not quite ready for all that this morning. But you bring a concept in there, and I may interpret it differently, but hey, knowledge is always up for interpretation in my perspective. So you have this concept of entrepreneurs of holiness.
Yes.
That entrepreneurs are set apart.
All entrepreneurs have to be holy. Every single one of them. Go read the book.
Yes, read the book. But when I think about that, I think that holiness, that being set apart, having to be willing or being called to do things differently means that you do eat last. And so realizing that I was going to have to prioritize someone else's livelihood.
That's right.
Through what Queenly was doing was scary.
Yeah. It's something that we say it a lot. Everybody says it, but some people are not qualified to say it. But everybody says it. They say, everybody's not called to this life. Well, some of y'all saying that ain't called to this life, but we won't talk about that part. But everybody's not called to this life. And it's true. Everybody's not called to the life of entrepreneurship. Everybody's not called to the life of management. Everybody's not called to be a director. Everybody's not called to be a leader. Like, there are few people in those positions, and there are fewer people doing them well because they are very specialized spaces, right? And so from that standpoint, if you're talking about entrepreneurship, then you definitely have to be. So in my book, I talk about holiness, and there's 2 aspects of it, right? One is, one of the definitions of holiness means to be set apart. And that's the one that you usually get from the Hebrew definition. When you look at a different definition, and I think it was the Latin or something like that, but if you look at a different definition, it actually talks about being whole and unbroken, like you are in complete oneness in that space. And entrepreneurs have to be both of those things. Entrepreneurs have to be whole, they have to be in a space of oneness, and they have to recognize that they are called to do something that most people are not called to do. Now, the word entrepreneur, by definition, means to accomplish great things or to get things done, right? And so and we understand that interpretation to mean things of great significance, not just everyday things. Like, it's not taking out the trash doesn't make you an entrepreneur, but
unless you get paid to do it,
right?
Build a business around it.
If you have created a framework where multiple trashes are getting taken out because of your own vision, now you can fall in that space. But because you asked your husband to take out the trash and he did it, not an entrepreneur. But accomplishing things is what entrepreneurs do on a grand scale. And you have to be called out. You have to be a particular kind of person. You are set apart if you're the kind of person that actually gets things done on a grand scale. Now, you can call yourself an entrepreneur and not get anything done and feel like you're an entrepreneur. But that doesn't make you one, right? You actually have to get some stuff done on a grand scale to be considered an entrepreneur in truth. And so that's in the book where we kind of delineate between the entrepreneur and the elite entrepreneur.
I think navigating that holiness, that set apart piece, being called to do something different, you've either got it or you don't.
Yeah.
I think that it's a set of principles. It's a way of thinking. it's either fostered in you or you figure out how to foster it in yourself.
Right. And in the book, we talk about there's 3 specific ways. There's 3 aspects of the 8 principles that if you want to be an entrepreneur, an elite entrepreneur, you can start with these 3 things. Now, they're not the first 3 principles, but you can start with these 3 principles. And that's discipline, consistency, and determination. If you do those 3 things, and we talk about what discipline actually means, we talk about what consistency actually is, we talk about what determination actually means. When you think about what a determination is, when the judge has made a determination, it's law. It's done. It is settled in court. There's no debate about it. It settles all the debate that previously happened, right? And so when people say, well, I'm determined, have you settled all the debate? Are you not asking any more questions about it? Is it law? Is it set in stone? Is it complete? Is it adjudicated? If it's not all of those things, then you're not actually determined, right? And so executing discipline, consistency, and determination are the 3 ways that you can actually kind of find the entrepreneur within yourself.
Growing up, I remember my mom always saying, "You're so determined." My grandma used to tell me that too. And over the course of growing professionally, I've never been in a space where I've been stagnant. I've always had that mindset that you do the work before you get paid to do it. Like you show up and give 110%. And whether you believe in God or it's just your manager watching or the universe, whatever it may be, I do feel like that's awarded. It is. Well, it's all the vibes, right? Like you actually attract your own opportunities by the actions that you take. And so taking that mindset of being determined, consistent. What was the third one? Discipline.
Yes.
There's this phrase that I say a lot, and it's actions lead and feelings follow.
Yes.
And so when we talk about actions, you've got to be determined. You've got to be consistent in the actions that you take in your business.
Yeah.
And just choose you're going to do the work, because you're not always going to feel like.
Oh, you're never going to feel like. You're rarely going to feel like. I tell people all the time when I consult new entrepreneurs and they're like, "Oh, I just always wanted to do this for a living." I was like, "So you're starting a business?" They're like, "Yeah." I was like, "So you're ready to only do this like 20% of your time?" Because the thing that you love is not what you're going to do as an entrepreneur. What you're going to do, most of it, 60, I will do 60%. I will do 50%. 50% of it is going to be sales, first and foremost.
Yes, that's the first thing you need to learn how to do.
So you have 50% sales, 20% passion in what you love. Now that's 70%. You only got 30% left to do anything else, right? You only got 30% left to get equipment and actually call your vendors and logistics and all the kind of stuff and administration and post on social media and, take in the orders and clear the credit cards. You only got 30% to do all of that, because you're going to be selling and then producing, and the thing that you love becomes kind of secondary. And that's why those principles are necessary in order to really carry out your entrepreneurship.
So carrying out entrepreneurship from a determination, from a consistency perspective, what can that look like?
It's doing the same thing over and over again every day. A lot of people want variety in their life and they want freedom, and that's not the life of an entrepreneur.
Really?
Do you feel free? Do you honestly feel free?
I don't feel free, but I sure as heck have a lot of variety.
You do.
I sure do.
You do have a lot of variety, and you also do exactly the same thing every day when you think about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of those. But I think once you realize that I've become really successful at this, being able to identify those things that move the ball forward, those things that you can repeat that continue to make you successful, you start to kind of control how much success you create for yourself.
You do, but from the realm of getting to that space, that's where the consistency part comes in, and that's where it's, well, wait a minute. You mean I got to get up every day and make 15 phone calls and send out 22 emails and make 7 touches, and every day I got to get up and I got to...
And motivation doesn't drive that.
No, there's no such thing as motivation.
What is that, Cat Williams?
That's what discipline is for. Discipline, see, motivation is
a hell of a drug.
Yeah, it is a hell of a drug. But more than that, it's slave to your environment and your circumstances. Yeah. Discipline doesn't care.
Right.
Discipline doesn't care if your mom died last night. Discipline doesn't care what's going on in your life. Discipline doesn't care how you feel about it. Discipline doesn't care about anything because discipline just is. Whereas motivation is slave to your environment and your circumstances. If you're feeling sick that day, discipline's like, good for you. We got to make $30,000.
Yeah.
Right? If your kid's fussy, discipline's like, and what? What are you going to do? Because this still has to happen. And so that's the place where discipline comes in, because motivation technically doesn't really exist. I mean, it comes and goes and you can utilize it. You can feel inspired. But I like inspiration more than motivation.
I'd have to agree.
Yeah.
Motivation never did anything good for me.
I made up I didn't make it up. Somebody told me the definition of inspiration, and they lied. It was not the definition of inspiration. You know how
is
I am about
inspiration like one of those heart words where people say it and they feel it, but they don't really know what it
No,
means?
nobody has no clue what it means. Nobody has any idea what inspiration actually means. In fact, we might just look it up here in a second.
Okay.
So, but this person told me, they were like, the definition of inspiration is kind of one of those, like the definition of insanity. And I didn't realize this at the time, so I took it and I embraced it. And I was like, this is the definition of inspiration. I went out around and told tons of people. And then one day I was like, is it? Let me look it up. And it was not. Definition of inspiration, which I have now assumed, is stimulate to a higher level of thinking and or activity. And so you can be motivated, which is a push mechanism, right? But inspiration is a stimulation. And if you do not operate in higher thinking or activity after whatever you said has inspired you, then you have not been inspired. And so I'll use the old adage of, like, people go to church and they're like, oh, the preacher preached real good today. Yeah, what did he say? I don't know. He talked about this. He talked about that. I was just so inspired. But then they've changed nothing. Their thinking hasn't changed. Their activity hasn't changed. They were not inspired, because inspiration requires the stimulation of elevated thinking and activity.
So I think as an entrepreneur, one of the things that you really need to realize to break free of this fear of success, this fear of responsibility, is the reality that we only use so much of our brains.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you reach what you feel is your human capacity, you've either got to accept that you're going to be stagnant right where you are, or you've got to be willing to expand how you think. You've got to pour into yourself. You've got to expose yourself to new situations and new things to get that brain to work in a different way.
Yeah. Not only that, scientists in neurology and epidemiology have discovered for long periods of time that whatever you think your threshold is, it's probably about 20% after that. And it's how they train athletes, it's how they train marathon runners and people who have long endurance. Whatever you think your capacity is, you can probably go another 20%. And another thing that they've learned is once you've eclipsed that 20%, you can actually probably go another 60% after that. It's very strange how the mind captures the body and tells it what it can and can't do, because the mind is always trying to protect the body. It's always trying to protect the body. So once you get tired or you get sick or you get this or you get that, the mind is going to start to shut things down in order to protect you. But what we have to recognize is that we are in control of the mind and the body. And we can cause the body to do things that it doesn't believe that it can do. We've seen it a million times. If you go all the way back, you always hear coaches and consultants talk about, the first person that ran a mile in 4 minutes. And then after that, everybody was running miles in 4 minutes.
Because they knew they could do it.
Right. Once it had been eclipsed. And so from the same concept is whatever you think your capacity is, it's probably about 20% beyond that. Once you get past that 20%, you'll realize that you now become limitless in your horizons. And that's truly how you get past the monotony and into the variety that you were talking about.
So as we get over some simple things to really get over that hump of being afraid to succeed, of being afraid to take on responsibility, one of the things that I've realized is that, and it's been scientifically proven as well, if you constantly tell your brain this is hard, and the way you speak to yourself, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And your brain is going to create this aversion to it because, you've told me this is hard.
Yep.
And so a simple mantra that I've adapted when I start to feel, and I think you feel it in your gut and you kind of feel it in your heart when you start to realize that something is going to be different. You're going to have to do something different. You're going to have to break out of whatever box you've put yourself in, is simply rewiring my brain I can do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
I can do this. It's as simple as just reassuring myself. And I think that just starting there, rewiring yourself to tell yourself, I can do hard things,
Mm-hmm.
is a really great place to just start to break free of that limiting belief system.
Yeah. And not only that, it's like we talked about earlier. If you go on and answer the questions that come after the hard thing, right? So we don't take the time. And this is why, you know me, I am very much a strategist, right? So I am looking way down the road to see what all the obstacles and opportunities are, right? So what happens is we get into this place where we feel like we can't do something because it's hard, and we tell ourselves we can do hard things. That's step one. Step two is to go past the hard thing and go, well, what happens after the hard thing is done? Because we're always, the fear that captures us is always the fear of the unknown. And so when we don't want the responsibility, it's because we don't know how we'll handle the responsibility. It's because we don't know what the responsibility looks like. We don't know what it requires of us, so on and so forth. But if we go out and strategize that and say, you know what, based on my research, based on my assessment, based on my knowing of myself, the responsibility will look like this. And not only from a standpoint of what we believe it'll look like, but what we've decided the responsibility is that we're going to take. Because we have the ability to say, I'm going to take this level of responsibility and nothing more, right? And so we can then itemize those things and say, okay, this is what the responsibility is going to look like. This is what doing this hard thing is going to look like for me. Instead of having this big unknown space, and then you get to that first step of, I can do hard things. Cool. Now I'm ready to begin the hard thing. But if I've already told myself, and this is what the hard thing is going to look like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. This part's going to be relatively difficult. It's kind of like when people go to climb Mount Everest, and they tell them things like, you know what, when you get to this level, you're going to get shortness of breath.
Right.
And when you get to that level, it's going to be a little lightheaded. And when you get, and so knowing those things are coming, you're still doing something that's hard, but it's not nearly as fearful anymore because you have the roadmap. And I think too many of us, one, don't go get the roadmap, and two, do not blueprint our own roadmap.
So a few weeks ago, Queenly had to do a really hard thing.
Yeah, what was that?
So we expanded, right? Brooke was our first hire.
Hey, Brooke.
Yeah, she's here. Brooke was our first hire, and Brooke has been with me for 2 years. And
I'm sorry, Brooke.
She
2
loves
whole
me.
years.
But she's been with me for 2 years, and I've been able to process a lot with her. And so our second hire at Queenly was to bring our graphic designer on full time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge step of faith.
I remember that conversation.
But I knew it would work out. And then that third step was bringing on an administrative assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And she was part-time. And Julie, if you're listening, I love you. But I expanded and I hired.
Mm-hmm.
And I took on the responsibility. You know what? I've got to generate enough revenue to cover this, to cover that. And then it came a month where, does your family eat or mine?
Yeah. And too many people who want to be entrepreneurs are doing it for self reasons. And so their response is, well, my family eats, not yours.
Yeah. Well, I had to remember that this wasn't personal, it was business.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make the decision to let her go.
Yeah.
Because the business, it was really great to have an administrative assistant, but the reality is I could probably invest an hour to 2 a day taking care of my own stuff and answering my own emails and managing my own schedule. It was a very...
Did you need it? That was the question.
I felt really important having administrative
how many of us do that? How many of
Yeah.
us move into a space because of how it makes us feel and not because of the actual opportunity in that space?
It made me feel like I had made it when I could tell people to...
you just contact my assistant. Yeah.
But you do all the time.
I say it all the time, and it
felt
does
like
feel
Stefan.
good. It does feel good
Like,
to be like,
dang.
you know what? I don't even know what's on my calendar. Just hit Gabby up. She'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted that. And the great thing is that what made ripping the Band-Aid off a little less hard is that I did know that this was just a part-time position. It was
Right.
extra money for her. It wasn't like letting go of my full-time social media manager or my full-time designer. But it was still a hard decision because I knew that I had made a decision that elevated my responsibility,
Right.
that somehow played into my self-defined
level
picture
of success.
picture of success.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to realize that I couldn't sustain it.
Right.
And I called and I let her know what was going on. I was very transparent. And it was okay. And it was one of those hard things I didn't want to do, but I did it. And I realized it wasn't personal. It was business.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are going to continue to grow and scale, we're going to have to be able to make these decisions, and we're going to have to be able to do
because the truth of the matter is, if you ever want to bring on someone full time, you have to make sure the business is solid enough to make that jump. So having the part-time person in place where you didn't have enough work and enough revenue for the part-time person, pulling that back so that you can then rescope the business in a way that it can move to a place where you actually have the work and the revenue for that person.
Yeah. It felt bad and it felt good all at the same time.
Yeah.
It was an empowering moment as someone who's wanting to transition not just from being an entrepreneur to running a business owner. And it's different.
It is different.
It's very different.
Especially in 2024.
Yes.
And beyond.
And we can go all into...
That changes the whole scope of this podcast.
It does. It does. One last question for you.
This better be a good one.
It is going to be a good one.
Oh, okay.
Figuring out how I want to phrase this.
As blatant and blunt as possible.
So if we know that we can do hard things...
I don't like where this question's going.
What is the hardest thing that you've had to do as an entrepreneur?
I'll have to say the hardest thing I've had to do is play small ball. Play in my weight class. And what I mean by that is I have a very heavyweight mentality. I do everything big. Everything's big. I did a business conference at one point in time.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. But that was the second one. The first one, I did the first one because somebody said I couldn't. And then, they're like,
let me show you.
You'll never get that many people in one room focused on that thing. I was like, oh, you're talking to the wrong guy.
Right.
Right. And so then the second one was like, well, I did one. Now this one's got to be bigger. Right. Because I don't believe in bringing things down. It's a personal flaw. Don't listen to that. You can bring things down. And so the hardest thing I've had to do is then recognize, kind of like you did, where my operations were, where my revenue were, where my opportunity was, and play in that lane instead of trying to play bigger every single time.
So you had to stay in your lane?
I had to stay in the scope of what I was available to me.
Yeah.
Even though I know, and this is where I get into the whole worth and value thing, and I tell people all the time,
Don't say the D word.
Don't say deserve. Please don't say deserve. But I tell people all the time, you're going to know your worth you're going to know your worth so much that you work your way out of business, because your personal worth is not the same as your business worth.
Yeah.
And in that same space, I had to take what I knew about myself as a person, because I know who I am in capacity. I know what I'm called to. I know what I can do. I know I'm made for big things. Mm-hmm. But at that particular time in my life, I was only capable of things at a small to medium level. Not only because of me and what was going on in my life, but the people that I had around me to help and assist, the support that I have, the money that I had, so on and so forth. I could have killed myself to try to make it big, right? But then I'm no good on the next step because I've got to do something after that. And so the hardest thing I had to do was play in that weight class, play in that welterweight class, knowing that on the inside and at some point in time, eventually, I'm a super heavyweight, right? And even in the things like my book, right? If you get my book is not a long read at all. But when you read it, it's a super heavyweight book.
It makes you think.
Yeah, it's not a welterweight book, but I know that I had to operate in the welterweight class for a period of time, even though I'm a super heavyweight. And so the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life is maintain that time and not get discouraged, not give up, not get pissed, not get an attitude, not get bitter. You know what I'm saying? Not feel like everybody else isn't, or I'm not, or whatever, and play in that weight class until I've beaten enough guys, to move to the next weight class, until I've trained hard enough, eaten enough protein, beaten enough dudes, got enough KOs on my belt to move to that next weight class.
You're such a dude right now.
I am so
Great
much a dude.
Analogies there. But I understand them, whatever. So to wrap all this
I was
up,
gonna say, because you said that was the last question.
it is to wrap all this up. It's failure is comfortable because we've been there. It's not comfortable, but we've experienced failure.
Right. It's home.
Yeah. But if you're being called to another...
Except for the people that have succeeded all their life, not because of their own effort. And so when they get into failure, they break down because they've had the support for so long. We'll call it privilege. They've had the privilege and the support for so long that they feel like success is nothing, inevitable. And the truth is success comes with real work.
I don't think I know what it feels like to not have to work for something. So that idea is what you mean. This is the first time you failed.
Right.
Oh my God, poor you.
Exactly.
And that's a really terrible perspective to have. But the reality is if you were called to truly be an entrepreneur, and I think if that is your calling, you feel it inside, and you know when you have to play small, and you know that there's something big out there. But the reality is up-level your thinking, and you can do hard things. Stop questioning yourself and just do it. Actions lead and feelings follow, period.
Absolutely.
The moral support, the business support, being the homie. If you want to read Stefan's book, the link is going to be in the bio. I highly suggest you pick it up. It's going to challenge you in your entrepreneurial journey, but to get to that next level, to realize that you can do hard things, it's one of those books that you just have to read. So if you have questions, you want to hit up Stefan, all his info is in there, and we'll see you next time.